What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected, and how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia, and welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast. Today I'm talking to Tash Pinter. With over 2 decades of practice and teaching, Tash weaves the sacred traditions of Tantra, Hatha Yoga, Kriya and meditative philosophy with her personal passion for movement, music and storytelling. Having grown up amidst the turbulence of domestic violence, Tash came to intimately understand the devastating effects it can have on the mind, body and spirit. This lived experience became the epicenter of her transformation. It ignited within her a deep longing for healing, not just for herself, but for others. She now guides others along the same path, blending hard practices with deep meditative inquiry, creating a space where you can reconnect with your essence and rewrite the narrative of your life. I am so very grateful and also really excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast, Tash. It's so beautiful to have you here today.
Thank you. It's honestly privilege, honor. And the moment you asked me, it was a full body yes.
You're very welcome. So today we're talking about Tash's story. Now we're talking her upbringing and what it means for a child to grow up with domestic violence. We're talking about how this has impacted her, which path it led to, the struggles along the way, and how she ultimately started seeing the light again and turned her life around. We are exploring how Tantra, Hatha Yoga, Kriya and meditative philosophy has given her a lifeline that she grabbed with both hands, and how she uses these sacred traditions as well as her lived experience to support others on their journeys. Please everybody note that we will be discussing domestic violence issues today in our conversation. So sometimes words and stories can cause sadness and distress. So, trigger traumatic memories for people, particularly survivors of past abuse, violence, or childhood trauma. So if you or a loved one are personally affected, please reach out and find support with your local helpline as well as medical professionals in your area. So before we are heading into our conversation today, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Tash, before we're heading into our conversation today, I usually start by telling the story of how we are connected and how we met. And I remember finding you on Instagram. You popped up somewhere and I started having a look at your posts, and I was just immediately drawn into the energy of what I was seeing and what I was feeling when I was reading your posts. And it was actually really beautiful. And I was like, I'm going to follow this person. And then over a couple of months, I just followed your journey until that one day when you made a post and you mentioned domestic violence in it and the fact that you have forgiven the person, the perpetrator, that was at the epicenter of it all. And reading that kind of touched me really deeply. And it made me reach out to you with a private message saying, I would love to hear more about your story, and told you why I was drawn to you and to your profile in the first place, which I know sounds random, but that's exactly what happened. And that's how our conversation started, and I asked you if you have ever told your story, if you would be willing to tell your story on a podcast. And that's how our conversation started. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you're here.
Somehow it's all aligned and nothing is ever coincidence. And
Exactly.
I do remember the post that I put up because that account was recently hacked. However, I remember writing that post thinking I've never actually told my story in a sense, because it's really it's hard. You don't really feel that people actually want to hear the reservoir of details that really impact you over a whole lifetime. It's big. And it's also big if you were like me and a child that grew up in this and decided to take the pathway of forgiveness and acceptance, because I'm still, in connection with my dad. I'm always going to have a special place for that man, regardless of some of the crazy things that I saw and was in my immediate environment growing up, in which I've come to know now was, particularly now being in an exceptionally kind and beautiful relationship where my partner exudes no anger, nothing like what I grew up in. It's almost like it's really been unveiled to me how crazy it was. But when you're a
Mm,
kid, and for all the kids out there right now who are experiencing this, they probably don't know any better because
mm,
that's all you know.
mm.
And so, there needs to be more room for these conversations. People out there need to know the long-term ramifications. And so I really see this as a way I'm hoping can be an insightful conversation. It's again not everyone's favorite topic, but we need to start talking about it.
It's such an important one, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is. And I think I was looking at the statistics just before I came on because, there's one woman being killed every week.
Yeah.
There's 1 in 3 women that over a relationship will call in at least once to coercion or violence or abuse. And I think it's 1 in 5 men.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is also something that doesn't really get talked about, right?
Yeah, and I think you and I had a little chat, in our chat before this, I mentioned that, I always keep confidence with students who see me, particularly for privates, but I can tell you through people that I've seen with privates, men have told me what their mothers did to them, and I can tell you it's happening that way as well, and probably that's even more silenced and not spoken about. So
Well, thank you for speaking up on the topic. Like you said, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. It's something that feels like it hits the media if there is a case or a severe case or a murder. That's when you hear it. And there's obviously some organizations that are really vocal about it, but then it gets forgotten really quickly. And it's something that only comes up when there's like severe issue at hand, but not something that we realize happens every day in some people's lives, right?
and
On
it
a
is
constant
happening
basis.
every day,
Yeah,
happening
yeah,
every day. It's happening in homes everywhere. And so it can be very silent and yeah, it's big.
yeah. Let's talk about the ramifications of, the bigger problem. Like, I definitely want to go into that, and pick your brain on that as well, as somebody who has experienced it yourself, like what your thoughts on that are. But before we go there, Tash, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. You've already made a few comments now that we can guess that your upbringing wasn't just filled with love and laughter and cuddles, that there were some really hard times. What was it like growing up for you?
So, I was thinking about how to answer this question before we had this chat. And it's quite hard to describe because I think if I'm to really go back into my memory bank, it's layered with all different things. And the layering comes from, I think, remembering the parts that were amazing. And, if you have food, shelter, you're taken care of in certain ways, then, you're really blessed. When that environment is layered with anger and constantly seeing your mum beat up in front of you, and also being emotionally abused and being told you'll never amount to anything, you are worthless, you're a piece of shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, but it
Mhm.
was this constant aggression that would come through in the layers of being taken care of whilst being taken to my dancing and whilst, all the other things that happens to you growing up. And I just remember there would be there'd be cycles of it getting really intense and then it would drop off in terms of the abuse and the violence and the aggression. And I think for a long time, I was suppressing it. When you're a kid, you can't actually acknowledge that that's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
If that's being demonstrated in front of you, you actually don't know that that's wrong.
Because you don't know any different, right?
You don't.
That's all you've ever known.
That's right. But I what I do remember absolutely was the morning that my mum had actually left my dad when we were getting out of the house. And in which case, I know that multiple times before that, we had ended up in a shelter. And so I can only imagine we went there because she was so scared for her life.
Yeah.
And I do remember one distinct memory as well, where he definitely chased her with a knife.
Wow.
That, and also, I remember her pulling me aside once and saying, if you ever see him do that, I need you to call the police. And so one time I did, and they came and they took him away, and I had made that phone call for them to come. But then the next time that this obviously came through, I remember he stopped me from going to the phone, pushed me against the wall, and I was very, very scared,
Mm.
very, very scared.
How old were you then?
It would have been before I was 8,
Yeah, wow. So really little still.
really little. And then I remember the morning we definitely left, Mum had people, she had neighbors. She must have told neighbors. She had them come around, they helped her. And when we left, I remember leaving a note for my dad saying, I love you, because I didn't know what was happening. I just remember Mum was scared, and we just
Yeah.
picked up things and left. And of course, that was the beginning of their separation.
Yeah.
But then I would continue to go back and forth because obviously once everything was settled, I was going between the two homes. And I think my mum was always very, very distraught about leaving us.
Yeah.
And I think what then began to soak in was two parents that really, I mean, hated each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And you being in the middle of it.
Yep. Being in the middle of it, going between the two. And then eventually, I remember when I was a teenager, I pretty much blew up.
Hmm.
I blew up in the fact that anxiety wasn't spoken about then, but I definitely had acute anxiety. I was extremely introvert. I wouldn't talk to anybody. But I also couldn't really pay attention at school. I found it very, very hard to pay attention. There just was nothing that would in any way, shape, or form had my engagement. The only thing that I know saved me was dance.
Yeah.
Dance was the epicenter of, you know, keeping me intact. And, I love Eckhart Tolle as he describes meditation sometimes as it being going surfing.
Yeah.
But he also describes it as dance because you are so deeply engaged that nothing else exists. Nothing. And so that was my escapism. Of course,
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it and I had a passion for it. But I would do anything to get out of the house. I would put all of my energy and direction into dance.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that was my healing pathway. I didn't know at the time, but it was.
It was your escapism, right? The one thing that made you feel safe away from the
Yes,
house.
safe. And I had an incredible ballet teacher. And I think he, for me, was that real structure of a father figure that was stable and strong, firm, because, ballet's a
Mm.
discipline.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just feel very, very lucky that I had that. That was honestly the saving grace. And I'm very, very grateful that my parents kept me in that because I'm not sure where I would be without
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And then I think the next, my parents had separated. I was going back and forth. And I remember having a lot of issues, even with my own mum. And it only came from everybody was just so hurt.
Mm.
You
Mm.
have two people that, made you fighting all the time and
Mm.
you're going back and forth and no place is stable or, you develop trust
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember when I was 16, I went to a party, it definitely wasn't meant to go, but like I had no parent approval to go, but I went anyway. I snuck out and I did get in trouble for that. The next morning, my mum had called my dad and he came and that was the first time I had actually been hit. And,
Mm.
I was hit pretty bad. I don't want to sugarcoat it. And I just want to say, by the way, it's really hard to talk about my own dad this way.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
It's a very conflicting thing that I'll
Mm.
always have to have there.
Mm.
But I remember going into a bit of shock with it after it happened, went into the shower, I coiled up. I was coiled up and couldn't actually open my arms. It was just like my whole body went into shock with the idea that that had even just happened.
Mm. Mm.
And then, of course, him and I didn't talk for quite some time after that. I know he felt absolutely terrible about it,
Yeah, yeah.
as you should. No one should ever feel good about that. But, as I've gotten older and I've just learnt so much about this generational trauma that comes through, I never knew his story at this time. I never knew what his background was. I didn't know what his upbringing was. And I can tell you it was much, much, much worse than what he had even done. But either way, I was always put into a place of feeling unsafe. And this feeling of not being safe has actually ricocheted the ripple effect
Yeah.
of that into everything, the ability to act on things that you want to do, the ability to have a healthy relationship with myself, with an intimate partner, with friends, with, it actually was even in the beginning part of when I was teaching yoga, I found it very hard to be able to do it. I'd cut myself
Mm.
off. Taken a very, very long time to understand that, circling back to, where all of this had come from. It
Mm.
actually goes back into his story and
Mm.
probably into the story before
Mm.
that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I want to go back into that a little bit because there was so much in what you've just shared with us. And I definitely want to explore that, what you've just mentioned, the generational trauma and what his story had to do with his behavior as well. But first, like you said, you were first hit when you were 16, severely hit by your father. And then you also mentioned that you've seen him chase your mother with a knife and you having to call the police because you were so worried about her safety. What was the abuse like for you when you were a child? And what do you remember, feeling and thinking? It's really hard for children, right? If you've always grown up in a house like that, you don't know what's normal and what not. It's almost like that's just the status quo that you are accustomed to, so to speak. And you're just constantly in survival mode, I guess, without realizing that that's not necessarily normal for a child, or for anybody, in fact.
It definitely isn't. And I didn't know I was doing this at the time, but I was disassociating.
Mm.
I was
Mm.
disassociating very, very well. Disassociating incredibly quiet, and I would internalize it. And yeah, as far as I can recall, I was definitely disassociating and I was sad a lot and angry for
Yeah.
sure.
And when was the point when you realized that what's happening is actually not normal?
It actually didn't happen in my teen or even my early 20s. Like, I know that there was always a kind of an undercurrent of anger. And I
Mhm.
would express that anger out on people. Like, I would myself be
Yeah.
angry at people. I was angry at the world. I was
Mm.
angry at the world. But I actually did not recognize, and I think I said this to you on our chat, but it's like, I don't want to use the languaging of where I realized something was wrong, but I think the moment I recognized the weight of
Mm.
it and how much of the weight I was carrying actually didn't happen until maybe my first trip to India, which was back in 2014. But I would say the real reveal came when I was 35, which was 6 years, 7 years after that.
Wow. Wow. So your whole childhood, your whole teenage years, you were still living in that kind of blur, I guess, of
A
just
blur.
surviving.
A
Yeah.
blur. A blur is a very good word because it is a blur because I think you will choose what you want to hang on to because actually in my early 20s, I was still very much, in a very big connection with my dad
Mm.
because I love him.
Mm.
It wasn't until later that I recognized what I actually lived through. took a very long time. And, it's really intriguing that that can happen. And I can only imagine it is happening. It has happened to people that way. But you could probably go a lifetime not really recognizing the pain that you're in. And rather it comes out in all of these ways.
Especially, like I said, if you've never experienced something else, right? It would be a different story if you experience, I guess, that relationship with your parents where you're being held and safe and you feel loved, and then it switches, then somebody comes into your life and you suddenly experience the flip side of the coin. But if you've never experienced that, then it's really hard for a child to even fathom what that could look like or what that would be like. But when we're talking about the abuse, so what did that look like? So he was obviously quite physical with your mom and you were witnessing that. Was it more like an emotional abuse as well?
Yeah, so that all ended when they separated, when I would have been about
Yeah.
7. So that ceased to happen in front of me after that. But I think it was more they would get into pretty big arguments. They don't have the same belief system. And why would they when, I actually, even at the time, bless my mom, I couldn't recognize where like the ramifications on her. And even in the past few years, she tells me quite a lot how much she regrets not being able to give me the nurturance that I needed, because I would go to her place and because I was so deeply conflicted, we would fight a lot. But that's not her fault, you know? And, I've got complete forgiveness and warmth and love wrapped around that now. But at the time, I was going between two parents. They hated each other. It just nothing about my upbringing was stable. Of course, there was pockets of love and, all of that. Like there was definitely that. As I said, it was layered.
So it's almost like you don't know what to expect, right? It could switch.
Layered and it's blurred. And, as I said, the one constant I had at the time was dance all the way up until I turned 27.
Yeah, yeah. What is it that you struggled with most then during that time, like coming out of that childhood and the teenage years and being in your early 20s and finding dance as that savior, to kind of pull you away from the hurt that you're experiencing? What were some of the things, though, that as a result of what you had experienced that you really struggled with in those years as well? And you said really up until you were 35 when it changed.
Yeah. So in my 20s, I would have been about 23. I went to my first festival and I was given drugs and I was like, oh, that felt great. And then 2 weeks later, I went on another binge and that actually continued all the way until, my late 20s.
It's escapism, right?
I just chose something else
Yeah.
to escape. However, obviously the impact of that's very different to dance. And at the time I had no idea how sad I was. I had never been to a psychologist. I haven't had any counsel. That was the pathway that I chose in that time period. And I mean, I really went there. Gonna sugarcoat it. I really went there, did not hold back. But all I was doing was suppressing something that I was not willing to converse with.
Yeah.
Would obviously come out through massive come downs, how tired and sad. And I know that halfway through uni, I didn't get the greatest marks when I finished uni either, because it sucked up about half of my studies, I just couldn't engage or concentrate or focus or direct myself into something that was constructive.
Yeah. And so what was it then eventually that really was the turning point for you, to be ready, I guess, to really face everything that you have hidden for such a long time, which is not really an easy thing to do. I think it's one of those things where it's like everybody has things that they have to deal with, and everybody puts things under the carpet, under the rug, whatever the saying is. But then obviously in your case, there was just so much, trauma and hurt there that you didn't want to face for so long. So what was the turning point for you where you felt, because you need to be ready for that, right? You can't just be like, okay, I'm just going to look at this thing over there now that I've been ignoring for my whole life. You really need to be ready.
So, you know, what I've come to recognize is that when you get fed up with yourself or how life is going, you get fed up with being in the same repetitive cycle, the same thing keeps happening. When you get so fed up, I think is the most incredible catalyst for deep, true awakening. Like not just change, but an awakening.
Yeah.
And that happened when I was 26, 27. You know, I kept meeting the same guy and, you know, I kept kind of moving into different relationships and none of them were fruitful or healthy. And, you know, the next thing that came through was there was actually a very distinct memory for me. And when we'll go back to when I was 8, there was back then you couldn't actually do internet shopping, but they had in your letterbox, the postman would leave something and it's a really big memory for me. And it's actually what I came back to when I was 27. It's like the memory that saved me. But I remember going and opening up this magazine and I ticked a Hatha Yoga book and I ticked a fortune telling book. I slid it back into the mailbox and the postman actually delivered it and my dad had to pay for it. And I remember getting into trouble because, you know, it wasn't science and it wasn't biology or, you know, a read that would be something of his delight. It was
Yeah.
something in me at the age of 8 saw that book on a picture and was like, I need that.
Mhm.
And of course,
So it's that intuition, right? That child intuition that led you there.
no, exactly. And, you know, just another layer. I remember layering some of my time at home teaching myself from this book. And I mean, all the Sanskrit was in gold writing and it was black and white. And I remember it so vividly. And I just remembered the essence of calm that would come back to me, even growing up, bouncing around between mum and dad. That was like something that I kept returning to. I didn't really know what it was because I was quite young. And it's a book that I used maybe up until mid-teens.
So it's something that you always came back to, like in between.
Always came back to.
Yeah, wow.
And you know, then it got lost somewhere. I've actually tried to find it. I'm like, Mum, if you ever come across a book that's black and white and it says Hatha Yoga on it, I need you to keep it because it's almost like a hidden jewel that came
Yeah.
to me and that's really it. It came to me because I really feel that these pathways choose you because
Yeah.
maybe somewhere along the line you have already experienced it. And in a way, in essence, now I know that I was actually remembering something. And, you know, so when I was 27, that memory came back to me when I was fed up. I was just so fed up and I was like, this isn't life. What am I doing to myself? Like, no one that I'm hanging around is anything that I need a different direction. Something needs to dramatically shift. And so, yeah, just circling back, I just feel that when we are fed up, it's actually a gateway. It's a golden gateway opening to be like, okay, well, you have a choice. And so with that, I relied on that memory. That memory came through really vividly. And then there was a small yoga studio down at the time at Clovelly. And I walked in and thought, oh, I used to be a dancer and I'll be able to do this. And I had that ego. Actually, I found that very challenging. That
Yeah.
teacher challenged me to the point it humbled me. I was like, what's going on? I was shaking. It totally humbled me. And I remembered just the nature of the breath and feeling that connection and how that person was able to articulate, the body and feeling. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what just happened to me at the end of that class, but I just got reunited. I just came
Wow.
back, you know?
Yeah. From one class.
Yeah, one class. And I never looked back.
That's really profound. Hey, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So crazy how it works. And then of course I went on this crazy expedition of moving through different different studios and actually just receiving different, let's not say styles of yoga, but different systems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they've all got a different approach, a different way, the why is different sometimes. So yeah, I just let myself go on a journey of experiencing that. And then it was maybe only a year later, I'd met someone who was a Bikram teacher, and I fell madly in love with him. And 3 months later, I said, let's go to India. I'm going to teach Bikram over there. And I was like, I've never thought about going to that place, but yeah, I'm coming.
Yeah. Wow.
I just didn't think twice about any of it. I was like, that's it. I'm committed. I'm going to go do a training and I'm going to keep on this transformative journey, because in the beginning, it was just, you're getting the introduction to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That actually becomes preparation over years to actually go into the even deeper layers.
Yeah. I mean, I just find it so interesting that all of this happened out of one yoga class as well. And it's like what you just said before. It's like nothing happens for no reason. And it's like you needed that one class to open up this whole new path in your life that ultimately has led you back to yourself. Because I mean, how many people go to one yoga class and go like, oh yeah, it was nice, it was fine, whatever, or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be yoga, it can be something else.
I was
But
very lucky. It was one of those classes where you have such a profound effect on you, because I feel like, you can either touch down in that bliss body or you won't.
yeah,
To
yeah.
reach the state of yoga in a yoga class doesn't actually happen all the time. But
Mm-mm.
whatever happened in that class, I reached that state, and it was so intriguing to me, to the point where I thought I had never felt that. And that felt more sweet, or, you know, I was so in awe of the feeling that I had to have more of it,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
amazing, because this is what actually brings us out of addiction and out of these behaviors that rob us of experiencing
yeah,
this, which is,
totally.
that's reality, right? So I'm blessed that that moment came through when it did, because I still feel that that moment was a huge pivot of the trajectory of where I was going.
Yeah. Was there, and I'm just intrigued now, because I mean, I think people have those moments so often in their lives, where they go like, it's such a sliding doors moment almost, where you go like, do I go, do I not go? And something completely different may open up in front of you. And I'm just intrigued if you remember that moment when you went to that class. Was there any, or should I go, should I not go? Was there that real feeling that I really need to go to this class? Because I mean, not everybody in this class would have had the same experience, even though the teacher was teaching it in the way they were teaching it. Like, even if we bring it further out into life itself and how people experience those transformative changes and where the path leads them, it's just so beautiful to see that sometimes, you just need to also listen to that intuition and just go where you feel like you need to go or where you feel like you belong. And from there, who knows what's possible.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't remember exactly. I just remember, again, that feeling of just being fed up. But also, I know that I was like, my mind is crazy. My life is crazy. I really need to do something about this, because I was just always, always, always consumed. And,
Yeah, yeah.
that would also come out in like over exercising. I
Mm.
would exercise a lot, just try to run it out.
Running away from things almost, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so, I'd be obsessed with exercise, and I love exercise now, but it's not an obsession.
Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
also a tipping point with that, I think.
Totally. I think it's generally with exercise or generally with doing things in life. And I've talked about this with somebody else on the podcast, the fact if people literally can't sit still, what is it that you're running away from, and what is it that you're not able to face, so to speak, because you're constantly on the go, and you're never able to just sit with yourself and actually see what's going on or feel what's going on.
Well, I think exactly. I really like the language that you just used. It's like that moment of going to do that class was almost like it was a universal alignment that said, hey, no more.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
more running away from that. It's time.
Mm.
And that was the moment where the true journey of not only healing, but self-discovery and living a more liberated life began to unfold. And it happened fast. It happened really, really fast.
Yeah.
Like I immediately ended up leaving a whole friend group that I was hanging around with. I had met other people, you get involved in these communities, and these communities are holding sanctuaries of a way of living that I had not been introduced to,
Mm.
because my whole 20s was swallowed up in parties and drinking and all the.
Mm. Yeah. And I love it how you said the universe, it's almost like, the crossroads and it's like no more. But for me, it's also that bigger sign of the universe going like, I've got you, here is another path for you and I've got you. And that even brings tears to my eyes, but it's that really profound moment where you had to feel it so deeply in order to be like, oh, there is something else, and I need to go there.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's pretty wild how that happened. But then even what unfolded the 10 years thereafter, like, the excavation of the stuff. And, that has also come in its own layers of
Mm.
peeling away things that I had no idea I was doing. Non-constructive habits. There's a saying within the tradition that you are the sum of your habits.
Yeah.
And, you know, bit by bit. I mean, I feel like, when you first start yoga, it's very much it's body orientated, and, you're using your body as a vehicle to then also move into the part of you that's not body.
Mm.
And you actually don't know that you're doing that for the first 5, 6 years. I remember that was never described to me that way, you know? It's something about it practicing, and let's just say asana, because I feel like asana is not the totality of yoga.
Yeah. Yeah.
Asana is its own, you know, intelligent methodology in which we reshape the breath. We create more life force, more prana in the body to then reshape our thinking mind, which is quite often why you begin a class feeling completely different to when you end. You are very intelligently and methodically, depending on how you're being taught, you're actually reshaping all of your alchemical processing, all of it.
Mm.
And, I've always been very discerning about who teaches me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like even that has been a incredible universal flow of the teachers that have come to me, particularly my first introduction in India in 2014. I went on a 4-month excursion online.
So was that first time you went with that guy?
So, of course, yeah, I was asked to go by this man I had fallen in love with. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to get out of Sydney and I'm never coming back. And so, at the time I was school teaching and I was doing that 5 days a week. And I would use all of my spare time. Any break I got, I was online and I was looking at every training I could possibly do. And there's so many. There's
Yeah.
so many in India. And particularly then, I feel like, that was kind of before there was this big surge of a lot of people doing yoga trainings. I was just at that beginning point where it was just becoming very popular. And there was this one particular place that really stood out. I couldn't quite grasp why. There was just something about it that felt right. And, you know, Lalit is exceptional. He was taught by Patabi Joyce and also BKS Iyengar. But then he would also had a master called Swami Rama. And Swami Rama was kind of bestowed within the tradition of Srividya, which is a tantric tradition. And I didn't know any of this, of course, when I had booked to do this. It just was something that, again, was meant to come to me. And, how that flow worked, again, it's just the power of the universe and being in flow, like Wu Wei. It's just
Yeah.
without trying, actually, the path that's meant for you, I believe, chooses you.
Yeah.
Is why I embrace all pathways,
Yeah.
all pathways, not one being better than another. but rather like embracing them all because they all have significance and value and they all have impact. But there might be a way and a specific teacher that will have a transmission for you that nobody else can give you.
Totally, totally. And I love when you talk about that because also, practicing human design and knowing that world as well. Like, I do believe that there is things that just need to find you, but then there's also different energy types out there where, some of them need to just respond what's happening to them. Some of them need to like also initiate more, and they can actually go out and make things happen themselves. So it's like all those things that come together. But yeah, overall speaking, I think we've all had those experiences where we go like, oh my God, why is this just not happening? I'm trying so hard, and it's almost like,
Because you're
girl,
trying too hard.
exactly. It's like, well, just relax and let it go. Maybe it's not the right thing. Maybe it's not the right time, whatever it may be. But sometimes I think as humans, we also try to overdo things, and to really kind of force things rather than just be and let things actually happen for us and to us. And when you're explaining that, that sounds like you just had opened yourself up to that path that wanted to present it to you. And, you were just looking what's coming towards you and what felt right.
Yeah, and I think the droplets started to come through as
Yeah.
young as it, right? It's almost
Yeah.
like you get pulled in and I've had my dear teacher, Rod Stryker, tell me, if you've ended up in this specific tradition, it's likely there's imprints already from you having been in it before.
Yeah.
And so you just simply are just returning and being called back to it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I remember going and doing this, the 4-week introduction, the 200-hour, though I have to say I've very rarely heard of people having 200-hour yoga trainings where they spend, 11 a.m. every day in silence. When I was woken up, Lalit would actually put in the kind of the discipline, which is something that I really needed at the time because I had gone from disciplined ballet dancer to once I didn't have discipline, I went crazy and got lost in the
Mm.
world,
Mm.
and escapism and all of the stuff. And then when this discipline came back, Lily introduced me to waking up, having a cold shower to mimic having a dip in the Ganges. The Goan sunrise was coming up behind me and there's mist. It sits in absolute silence. Then there'd be chanting to introduce, then meditation, then closing mantra. And, then we'd stay in silence, journal. We were asked to journal. And, then we would go into Ayurveda. Was a big part of that training.
Yeah.
But, more importantly, the philosophy that was shared was actually the living philosophy and the living wisdom of that tradition. And, I can't even describe what happened to me in that 4 weeks, but it was a complete shedding. And there was a distinct moment halfway through where I realized the man that I had actually left Sydney for thinking that I was going to be with had actually left me there for another woman.
They had left you in India for another woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
He's like, go on a trip, go and have an amazing time. And he had actually left with someone else.
Oh, God.
But do you know what? At the time, it was just like my whole world had ended. But it was actually the perfect, again, another doorway opening because what it did was it cracked open everything I had suppressed. So that was a big pivotal point where I actually began to realize how much hurt I was holding.
So, because the hurt of what's happening to you was bringing up everything else.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
had happened.
It wasn't the breakup. Of course, I was definitely sad and heartbroken, my first proper breakup. But breakups actually bring up everything that's
Yeah,
unresolved.
I was going to say the same. Yeah, it's usually like way deeper than that.
That's why it's always prickly and it's hard and it's uncomfortable because not only are you, of course, suffering from the heartache, you're also everything that you've decided to suppress and not converse with. It's almost like it comes up, like a volcano.
Mm.
And, I remember the moment that happened because I ran down to the pool. There was this kind of pool in the middle of this amazing grounds in Goa, this retreat center that my teacher had. And, I went out and crying, like absolutely just damsel in distress. Like, I can't believe it. He left me. Blah. I was just losing it. Lily literally picked me up. And I'll remember this always. He picked me up and led me to a place where we could just have a private conversation. And nobody had ever said anything like this to me, but he said, you know, you should be laughing. You should be laughing. You should be laughing because I'm going to tell you the truth. You have a lot of ego. You walk around here like you're amazing and you're this and that. And he just said, but beneath that, I can see that you are not best friends with yourself. You're not best friends with yourself. And I can tell you it's now time because you can't keep doing this. And I know that beneath the ego that you present, you are actually an amazing person. You're an amazing person and you should be laughing at what this person's done to you.
How did that feel in the moment?
Oh, I was like, thank you for pulling me aside and just having a firm conversation because I really needed it after being so wild and raw. And, it was a moment of like, again, just pivotal in the fact that I was like, oh, I'm a seeker. Realized that's actually a big part of my dharma. When I'm not seeking, I get lost. Not learning and I get very lost. And so then, I made an unwavering commitment to myself. I was like, again, that was just another cycle that showed up again.
Yeah.
And I decided, I'd met this amazing Canadian woman who she had gone to India with no plans. And we decided that after the training, we were just going to float in the wind and go to wherever we were taken to energetically. It's just like proper, surrendering to the rhythm of life. And, Lalit had given us specific places to go. We did a Panchakarma in the Himalayan Institute. And that's where I had my first kind of connection to Swami Rama happen. There was a kind of home where he used to practice in a lot. And that was my first real experience of dropping into the state of meditation. I was more intrigued by what happened to me in that room than I was even at the whole 200-hour training. Because, when you drop into that place of nothing else existing, and, I've had plenty of experiences in meditation where the body actually, there is no body. It dissolves. It's really you just touching down to reality.
Yeah. And coming back to yourself.
Everything
right?
else is kind of the illusion, And how much do we love to grasp illusion?
Yeah.
You think slowly, the power of meditation is it teaches you form the habit, a new habit of not falling for the narrative so much.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it really just brings you back to yourself, your true self, and it doesn't let you get caught up in the world as much, and in everything that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Such a powerful tool that is accessible to everybody because the amount of, I'm sure you've heard this too. A lot of people don't meditate because they think they can't. And yet I'd had all of that in my background, could never be still. And then in the space of 2 months, had this experience in meditation that, again, was just another catalyst for, holy, what is this?
Yeah.
I want to know more, and it drives your hunger to know.
Yeah. But it's funny when you say, like, some people think that they can't meditate. I think it's also, well, first of all, they think they can't meditate, but they also believe that they don't have the time. And I really do love, there's that saying, I don't know who said it, but you probably know, but it's somebody that said, you should meditate an hour a day. Unless you're busy, then you should meditate too. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it's so
No.
true, right? It's because it's like people think, oh, I don't have the 20 minutes a day or however long your practice, involves. But then as you meditate and as you're getting into that, you realize that it brings you so much more than that. And the whole day, you can handle everything that comes your way so much better. And, some people might recognize that with exercise, they might be like, oh, I don't have time to go for a bike ride or for a run or for a surf or swim or whatever. But then if they do, they come back and they go like, oh my God, I'm actually functioning again. I'm actually able to do my work or, whatever you have to do. And I think the same with meditation.
It actually gives you time back.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Meditation, yoga, breath, all of that. And, particularly for me, I love each meeting now to be, in deep seated reverence and devotion.
Mhm.
For me, that now brings more sweetness to the practice. But, I love the saying of yoga meditation does not take up your time. It will be the one thing that actually gives you time back. And it will do it in a very, very, very profound way.
And I mean, time is just a construct anyway, right? If you look at it. And I mean, it's probably a bit harder to tell your boss if you have a 9 to 5 job, be like, well, time's just a construct. I'm not here at 9 and I might leave early, but
Yeah. Getting back to habit thing though, it's actually like how many people have the habit of watching TV for 2 hours a night before bed,
exactly.
or the habit,
Exactly.
happily make habits that are maybe not constructive, and yet a 20-minute habit a day that could actually literally, it's said that I love this saying of, asana changes your relationship to the past, pranayama changes your relationship to now, and meditation will change the trajectory of your future.
I love that. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. And
beautiful.
so, and it will totally change your destiny. And I truly
Mhm.
believe it. I've seen it because I don't think I would be where I am right now without it.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I'm not a huge yogi, but I am a meditator and I have been meditating for almost 2 years now, like Vedic meditation. And yeah, I agree with you. I'm sometimes the same. I'm like, I don't know how I would have handled the last 2 years without that practice.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, if I don't have time, it's meditation and yoga nidra.
Yeah, yeah,
That's an absolute non-negotiable. And then,
exactly.
I do feel sometimes I do need to have that exquisite feeling of moving with intention. And I think some of how yoga has been taught is very diluted.
Yeah,
Diluted from, what it originally gave us, supporting the visceral body and all of that. Because when you find that supreme clarity from an asana practice and then you go into pranayama meditation, it's only elevated. But I hear you. Like, I'm totally a meditator and have been since that moment in
yeah,
2000.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
always the very epicenter of my practice.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. So, Dash, tell me about how, doing all that work in India and, being exposed to those practices, how did that then help you see what had happened to you and bring up that hurt and showcase what you have been going through? Because you said before that that didn't really happen until you were 35, until you realized what that actually meant for you as a child, as a teenager, as a young adolescent growing up.
So, I think when you're on this path of discovery, you're kind of laying the foundation to then uncover. I think what we don't always necessarily realize that we're doing, particularly in yoga, is you are stirring. You're stirring your memory bank and you're stirring stuff that you actually don't know about yourself yet. And actually, it's said that if you do very Rajistic practices for too long, there's probably going to be a moment where you walk away from it because you're actually stirring it and you're creating a lot of instability. And
Mhm.
so, even though I had these very profound experiences in India, there was actually a moment, I would say, when I was 34, I actually met somebody and got involved in a relationship that probably wasn't the healthiest. And I remember I fell away from my meditation. That was a moment where I fell away again and I kind of fell back into the world. I won't go too much into that relationship. All I know is that, again, when it ended, I had this huge well of sadness. I ended up traveling to India for the third time. I traveled there because I was in search of a teacher, because I realized that even though I had been introduced to some really, really phenomenal ways of meditation, it was the foundations, it was the foundation layers. And I actually spent 4 years doing the same mantra. I had the same mantra
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
4 years. But when I look at what those mantras were, it actually really, really came full. It came through fully, moving from darkness to inner empowerment, darkness to light. Yeah, I went to India again in 2019, and I went back to Swami Rama's ashram, and I, really, really, really wanted a teacher. And of course, he kind of came my way maybe 4 months after that trip. And, then that would take us nearly almost into 2020. And of course, we all know that that was the moment where everything started to kind of close off, and we didn't really know what was happening. And I was meant to go and do my first kind of training with Rod over in Colorado. I mean, it wasn't really a yoga training. It was literally a course for life. It was a life course. And, it wasn't for me to be a great yoga teacher. It wasn't for me to learn skills. It wasn't for me to how to teach. It was a specific course that was me going inward and uncovering what veiled my own heart. And now at the time, I had no idea it was going to be as strong as what that was. But I ended up doing that course at home. I was living in Tamarama at the time, and so I went into doing this course, and of course, each day we were doing very, very distinct contemplative practices, which contemplation in the tradition is different to meditation. It's almost like you're in a meditative seat, but you're stirring with intention,
Actively stirring. Yeah. Yeah.
actively stirring. Yeah. And, you know, day 2 was self compassion and lack thereof, meaning the veil of not showing yourself self-compassion. And now I had no idea how much I was withholding, and the meditation in memory, because I did it for about 4 months thereafter, because it was just the most insane moment for me. But, the meditation was somewhere along the lines of acknowledging that you were hurt, that you were in pain, and that you were carrying it. And then it went into, being able to show yourself love, how the divine would love you. And I remember we had gone through these like almost bare in asana, but energetically, because of the Tantra and the way that it opens up your body energetically. I cried like I'd never cried in my life, to the point my neighbor came upstairs to check in on me because I had cried so loud when I got off the call off this contemplation, because I recognized I had withheld compassion to myself my entire life. I was so self-critical and so, and that's come from the way I was spoken to.
You've never been shown how to show yourself
No,
self-compassion,
and then
right?
the idea of loving myself how the divine would love you. The divine loves you, does not criticize you, embraces all. And I had no idea even where to start with how to feel that. And that honestly, that cracked me open, and I realized that was just the biggest point for me in 2020. And that was, I actually had to stop teaching. I couldn't teach yoga after doing that particular course, because I literally felt like I had been broken. It was one of those real, raw spiritual awakenings. Broken in an amazing way, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Raw to the bone, absolutely tender. But then I started to question, well, what am I teaching? Where am I teaching from? How am I living? How am I perceiving myself? I need to take some time. And so I took 4 months off in that time. And I'm so glad I did, because it was just a sacred juncture. I had gone back to school at the time. I was getting lots of work. So I would come home and I would do this contemplation and a very specific yoga nidra. That yoga nidra I did for 1 year, and then that contemplation I did for 4 months. And over that 4 month period, I began to notice such significant changes in my approach to myself, my approach to my friends, how I was actually even seeing. These energetic practices were just like almost cleansing my vision.
Yeah, wow.
Of course, it's not easy to go in every day and say you're hurt, you're in pain. It's almost like I'd go and sit down and I'd be feeling great. And I'm like, oh yeah. But beneath all of this
Yeah.
is actually a reservoir of hurt.
Just allowing to feel it, right?
Yes. And we cannot heal unless we let ourselves feel it. So it was the perfect introduction to how even more powerful these practices can be. And then, of course, there was a whole journey that I then went on thereafter. I mean, I went on a whole thing during COVID. All I was doing was these really, really potent courses that were helping me understand more about the tradition that I had been introduced to and the specific methodologies and the approaches and the Kriya. I mean, Kriya meditation for me is huge, in a way of, completely reshaping how I see consciousness itself, how I perceive it, because consciousness is pure. And then being introduced to meditations and the philosophy around, the tradition holds in real reverence this one specific teaching that there is actually a light within your heart where no pain, no affliction, no doubt, no disturbance has ever entered. No matter what event has happened to you, there's actually a light there, a flame. It is unwavering, completely, never, never, never burdened.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I was given guidance, in a very specific way. I realized I needed a teacher. You need somebody to guide you because we can't guide ourselves to those places when we don't know it. And I'm all for we're all connecting to the inner teacher always. But sometimes we need somebody who's walked the path already to just kind of give us the right guidance to understand, but that specific teaching for me still holds true now. It's like, if I am ever getting swept up or caught up in anything, I can always use my practice to come back to this,
Yeah.
knowing that there's actually a part of me that is completely not touched by that conflict, by that thing happening.
I really love that. Did you say that was part of the Kriya meditation practice?
Yeah. So the Shoka Joytiya. So it's basically the light beyond all sorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me is probably one of the most impactful and significant teachings was those two. And then the rest just kind of bloomed because, Tantra is all about empowerment. It's power.
Yeah.
And I recognized that before it came into my field, yoga expands your awareness, but you can have lots of awareness and no power,
Yeah. Yeah.
no personal power. And I didn't have it. And when I started actually experiencing all these different layers that I had never been given, the impact it had on my psyche was huge. Like the psychology of yoga, I've realized through that experience is significant. It's significant. And of course, along the way, I'd get little hints. Oh, I'll go see a therapist as well, because sometimes I was pulling up things from that well that were really intense and I'd feel overwhelmed. And I would actually, at least go and see somebody. But I never started doing that until, I had met Rod. And I remember he said, if this sort of thing is in your background, particularly in childhood, you're not to do it alone. And I really appreciate that advice because I don't think any teacher had come my way previously to that actually even said that.
And I think it's just such a good message, generally speaking, as well, right? Like, because often we think we have to figure things out on our own or we have to get through things ourselves. But there's always people that are able and willing to help, and just support us on the journey.
They are. They're here to help. And I have a lot of respect for the right counsel. It's really, really important. You can do all the things, whether you're drawn to psychedelics or, breath work. And again, for me, all of the pathways are embraced. But just know when you also need just that direct experience of being able to talk to somebody who might be able to give you an understanding or help you find your own understanding about, past that cannot be changed. But all we're doing, I think, and I know my path has always been just changing my relationship to it, is that's all we can do. And then in the background, also knowing that part of you that was also never touched by that. But, those two for me are really the contemplation on self-compassion and the light that is untouched beyond sorrow. Those are two really significant things that came my way that allowed for the empowerment to then begin to take place through, Kundalini and things like that. So that's been in the forefront of, some of the offerings I'm going to put together, particularly for next year. So, because I've realized it's now fully bloomed and it's ready to be shared from this perspective of how powerful it can be.
Yeah, yeah. And having that lived experience that you've had, right? Being like able to help people that are struggling, like not necessarily with domestic violence, but with any other issues that they have and support them.
Yeah. Well, I think if there is an epidemic, I think there's a lot of people that don't show themselves love.
100%, 100%.
There's a lot of lack of self-compassion out there.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, these types of practices of awakening can't bear its fruit if we don't have self-compassion. It won't bear its fruits. So it's a really, really important thing that I think really needs to be shared through, this specific way. There's other ways as well. I know that the Buddhist path has a different way of self-compassion, but I think it is considered our foundational layer. You want to have it so that you can then begin to expand everything else. And people will feel it from you because when you show it to yourself, you will exude it outward and it will ripple out.
Yeah. And when you were talking about it before as well, how it really cracked you open, that course that you did, and how you just started feeling all that hurt and that pain, and, how it all went back to finding that self-love for yourself. The thought for me came up as well that, like, it all starts with self-love, right? It's also like, how are we supposed to love anybody else in our lives, really, if we can't love ourselves? And it's sometimes people go like, it's so easy to, say I love you to somebody else or love somebody else. But if you don't really truly love yourself, I don't think you can actually love anyone outside of yourself.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, like it's said within the traditions, including Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, like all of that. It's said that the longing for a love, particularly in an intimate partner, will actually never satisfy you.
Exactly.
And that is
Exactly.
a longing. That is actually that longing that you think that you have for somebody else is actually the longing to meet the inner beloved and to show that love and to feel and receive it from that seat of that light. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
that because we're not truly satisfied until we feel that love from the divine, because that is a all encompassing
Yeah.
saturation of unconditioned love. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And imagine a world where people could genuinely love themselves, the ripple effect that that would have on their families, the communities, whole countries,
Oh, yeah, all of that. I mean, you hear of
That's it.
people being in relationships and still feeling very lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of it is because people don't love themselves.
Yeah. I also think about children not feeling that they were loved. But it's probably because the parent wasn't emotionally available without even realizing that that's what's happening. So when we were talking about transgenerational trauma and just generally transgenerational things that are happening, I guess that's a huge one, I think, that's in there as well. So I love that that's the work that you're putting out into the world with all the practices.
Yeah. And it's not easy.
Yeah, no, it's
As we
not.
try to as soon as we try to go down a pathway where we're maybe spiritually bypassing or you're missing the nectar of it,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
said that you'll go much further if you learn how to convene with your dark than if you just converse with
Mm.
your light.
Yeah.
We actually have both. Everybody has
Everybody has both. Yeah.
everybody has both.
Yeah.
And we're made up of both. But that's also understanding not to just go to the dark all the time
Yeah. Yeah.
and consume yourself with there's something to be fixed and something's wrong. It's just this way of layering
The
of
dance, right?
the dance. Yeah. I usually get the hit when I'm ready to go and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to maybe go into that part that maybe I haven't discovered yet. But I also give myself plenty of space these days to just have breaks from just
Yeah.
conversing with dark too, because
Yeah.
it can get really dark and dreary and mysterious.
And overwhelming sometimes. That's what I sometimes find when I go too far, too fast. I'm like, I actually need a break. You actually need to let it simmer and it needed to kind of transform, the things that you've worked through rather than just keep digging, of what else is there. Yeah. Having done the transformative work on yourself and really, looked under the veil, so to speak. How did that change your relationship to your parents, especially to your dad at that point? Like, how did you look back at what happened to you and how were you able to reconcile that as an adult in that moment?
I would say the last 4 years has been a bit up and down with my own dad, just because as you begin to uncover the depths of what happened and how, obviously living now in a relationship where that does not exist and he's got two beautiful boys where this aggression does not exist, it's actually been the most healing thing. It's
Beautiful.
been the most healing relationship that's come my way. Absolutely. And has actually healed my relationship to what father is, you know.
Mm,
So,
mm,
but, I actually have more now than ever compassion. That
mm,
compassion now extends to my dad. And I have to continue to nurture that because, we all have an end point. And I don't want to get to that end point and not feel that I didn't try to overcome, but really just he deserves my compassion because I don't know if anyone else is going to give it to him. And that's my choosing. I don't want anything to happen where I'm still carrying the weight. Like, I don't want to carry the weight into this next chapter that he's coming into of life. And I try to give more understanding. I'm not trying to change him. He can't be
mm,
changed. But, we actually only chatted maybe a couple of days after we chatted last because I really just felt the call to just check in on him, you know?
yeah, yeah,
And, it was a beautiful, great, warm conversation, and I don't want to miss out on those
yeah,
because there
yeah.
won't be many. We don't know ever how many we have of those ever with anybody, actually, with
It's
anyone.
very true.
And so, that's my choosing though. And I know for some people, you have to have a much further boundary and maybe you can't have that person in your field anymore.
Mm,
We have enough, we don't live under the same roof, but my compassionate heart is going to show the understanding and the acceptance because for me, that feels aligned with how I want to be
mm, mm,
and how I want to be able to, I feel that the whole upbringing was the catalyst of my own awakening. And anybody's traumatic experiences or events can be a catalyst to awakening. And, to show more love and compassion is the pathway I've decided to choose because that brings me lightness. Because if I decide that, I just can't deal with what happened and I cling to that narrative, then what good is that going to do?
yeah. I mean, I love how you reach the point where you can speak, with such devotion about that as well and with the real authenticity around it because that just takes a huge evolved state of looking at things, and being conscious around what's happening and how it's all connected. And at the beginning, you said what your dad did to you was less severe than what was done to him, which is why you also realized, the whole transgenerational trauma that can be passed down to generations,
Yeah, I actually think that that's maybe what's been happening just in general. I think there has been a lot of trauma that's come through. How people were treated by their parents is now coming through. I mean, yeah, domestic violence just seems to be on the news all the time now, more than what it ever was. And it's being passed down. I don't know if
Mm.
these behaviors are being passed on and then they're being mirrored. And I don't know if my dad will ever be in a place to be able to recognize that he's also in pain, because his whole generation is like, oh, I don't need to go to therapy. That's just not,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that that will come through, but I actually accept that now. So, and there's been no conflict, or none of that intensity has come my way for quite a long time. So I've got a nice, healthy boundary. We're good, you know?
Yeah, but what's really beautiful is that you've done the work, and it always takes somebody to break that cycle, right? And I agree that a lot of the time it probably is the transgenerational things that get passed from one generation to the next. And that's not excusing, by the way, any of the behavior that people that are perpetrators are portraying onto their loved ones, but it does explain things to a degree, right? The question is, how do we deal with that as a society, and how do we make sure that we break the cycle? Because we can't just rely on somebody like you being in each of those families, that's affected to be strong enough to break that cycle.
Yeah. Well, that's, there won't be everybody like me. There won't be.
Exactly.
And there's going to be a
Exactly.
lot of people who maybe get through a whole lifetime not knowing what they actually endured because they disassociated. Or, you know, I wish I had the answer to what's happening right now. And I mean, I think it's such a complex issue. It's so complex, and,
It's huge.
it's happening in people's homes. So it's not happening out on the street.
And it's mainly happening with family and friends and relatives, right? That's the other thing. It's not even strangers, it's mostly people that we know and we love.
Mhm. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm deeply concerned. And, I've always been able to pick up on it, but I usually can pick up on I'm a casual teacher, but I can usually pick up on when a kid's not okay. I'm just so highly sensitized to it that you can tell if there's something happening, and maybe home is not a nurturing environment. You can usually see it. I can feel it and sense it through body language. It's very, very clear. And I usually just give teachers heads up and I put things down, but that's all I can do. And this has actually sparked my desire to go back and do counseling, because I think from having lived it, the only thing I know I can do is to be of service in multiple ways. And one of those ways is to counsel, because there is a way to overcome it. I just don't have the answers right now to how to stop it. And I think if we did have the answer, they'd be utilizing it by now, because nobody wants women being killed every week.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. This is going deep into the psychology of people, and again, what they've endured and what is unresolved and how it comes out in these spurts of anger. Yeah.
And how we solve that as a society, right?
Yeah. Because it
It's
seems
a
to be a
huge
cultural thing.
issue. It is, yeah. So, Dash, looking back at that little girl, what would you tell her?
I would be saying to me that you are loved, you are strong, and, it's actually a really big question, because I'm now going back and imagining myself as a young girl. And, I think all you really need when you're a kid is to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could even live in not the greatest of settings, but if you're receiving that undeniable love, you kind of have it all. And I think that if anything, I probably would have told myself that more or had that said to me more,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, beautiful. And it's what we just said before as well, right? Even as adults, that's what we need to learn as adults at any age, how to love ourselves, how to be that love so that we can have that for ourselves, but then also for others.
Yeah, definitely.
Dash, thank you so much for sharing your story with me and all the listeners today. I really appreciate your time and your vulnerability. It's not easy to talk about those things. And I really, really appreciate that you've, opened up to me and agreed.
No, I love that you did, and I've had some hallmark experiences lately where I'm like, oh, I'm ready to now speak about this, and I'm hoping that again, this is just another pivot in the road where maybe I can be a voice for this and use it in a way that's giving back and showing others that there is a way to overcome because we
Mm.
can. We can overcome anything. And I truly, yeah, I'm honored that you reached out to ask me to share and begin just another chapter in the book of being able to share the impact, but also the true nature of human existence, of being able to overcome and how that is your ultimate strength. So thank you.
Thank you. And I am 100% sure that this is not the last we've heard of you. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this journey unfolds for you as well, because you're such an important voice in this space. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to unfold for you there. The three main pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from my conversation with Dash today is, first of all, I loved how she said that you are the sum of all habits, and that really reminds us that changing small habits can really change the trajectory of our lives as well, because it can change who we want to be and who we want to become as people as well. So, remember that you are the sum of your habits. And if you want to change, and if you are willing and ready to change, then sometimes it's just about, starting with the first little positive habit that you want to include. The second one was that everyone's traumatic experiences can be a catalyst to awakening. And, by that, we don't mean that every awakening necessarily needs to be dramatic, but it means that if you have been going through something that is really challenging and you are able to, change the viewpoint and the way you look at it, it can actually support you and lead you on an awakening journey. And then the third one, and I really love that, and I've never heard it before, is the Vishok Joy Tear, which is the light beyond all sorrows. And as Dash said so beautifully, it's not about, suppressing anything that's happened to you or not being able to work through that or, being able to feel it. But it's just knowing that there's always that light in your heart that is not touched by anything that has ever happened to you. And it's just the pure divine light of who you are and how you are connected to the divine and to the greater good. I really, really love that. And I'll be thinking about that a lot as well. I have to read up a bit more on that as well.
I'll send you something because I had a feeling it would come up in today's chat just because I knew it is a very extraordinary teaching, and it's actually something that I'm building like a 40-day sadhana around. And it also came up spontaneously on the retreat, and everybody was like, what was that?
Give me more. Yeah. Again, you're hearing the universe like telling you that we want to hear more.
People tell me, I'm like, oh, okay, we're ready to go into that one. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Amazing. And then, Dash, you've also mentioned a few teachers, and the modalities that you have personally practiced. So we'll put a few of those things into the show notes as well with links so that the listeners can follow up on some of the teachings that you've talked about today as well. Tell us where can people find you? You know, if they want to know more about you, if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to work with you, like what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, so I think the best way is always the website. So it's tashpinter.com. That's my website URL. So I'm really easy to find. And within that, you'll see like events that I'm putting up. I have a couple actually that will be kind of layered through the next 6 months between yoga nidra and, 40-day sadhanas and some online practices that I'll be doing, as well as, I am in Bondi. So I'm over at Rare. So, and I will be distinctly actually teaching a tantric chill flow in which I will be giving droplets of, you know, what I've learned from this Himalayan tradition, also infused with my love of dance and, world music. And it all kind of comes out in this experience that feels for me like deeply intertwined in spirit. And so there's many ways to catch me, but mostly the website if you want to contact me personally. And then, of course, I've got Instagram, which is also my name. So those are my two platforms for now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Again, I'll put all those links into the show notes so that people can find you really easily. To get in touch with Tash, if what you've heard today spoke to you, Tash was so amazing and vulnerable today, sharing her story of being a child of domestic violence and how she has lived her life and how she's eventually not overcome that, but found a way to really work through what has happened to her and is now such a great advocate of sharing that with other people as well that are having difficulties and challenges and, also needing support to overcoming that. So do get in touch with her if, any of what you've heard today spoke to you. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really do hope that you got something out of this episode. I think we touched on some really important and challenging topics today. So please do share the podcast with your family, with your friends, or with anybody who you think might benefit from what we have talked about today. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.